As I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, people who have been here for tens of thousands of years and taken care of this country, and we enjoy that today. Just want to start by saying I'm so grateful and honoured to be here tonight. It's a real pleasure, and also to be here and hear from such distinguished guests. Feel very inspired by that talk. Thank you guys, and you've given me lots of ideas too. One evening, almost 3 years ago, the doorbell rang at my home in Marrickville in the inner city in Sydney, and a whole bunch of people both new to me and people familiar to me, started to pour through my front door with a dish of rather exotic looking food in their hand. And here, people from all over the world coming together with a bunch of my Aussie mates, the Welcome Dinner Project was born. What I saw that night was people's eyes shining. What I heard can only be described as the sounds of connection. And what I felt was a fire in my belly. In this place, around my kitchen table, my sense of purpose and passion collided, creating a force beyond anything belonging just to me. I'm standing here before you because I've been captivated by what happened that night and the welcome dinners that have taken place on over 180 occasions since and spread to every state and territory in Australia. At the beginning of every welcome dinner, our volunteer facilitators greet the guests at the door and ask them to fill in a name tag. Now, this is a name tag with a difference, because we ask everyone to write on it what their passion is. Because no matter who we are, where we've come from, what we've been through, we all have hopes and dreams and things we love to do, or things we would love to do given half a chance. So, imagine you've arrived at the door of a welcome dinner and you're being handed one of those name tags right now. What would you write as your passion? I want you to turn to the person next to you and ask them, what's your passion?
What's your passion? Building things. What's yours, Roger? Yeah. Thank you. I'm really excited to hear your speech you're talking about from it.
So how did that feel? A little awkward perhaps? But it feels good though, right? To talk about what you love. But it's not the typical question we ask. Usually it's, what do you do? Or something about the weather. But actually the what do you do is a topic that's off limits at welcome dinners. Because we want to get to the heart of things, and nothing quite beats sharing the things we're passionate about. In fact, it's something we can only speak about from the heart. And now I'd like to share with you about my passion. 12 years ago, I had the chance to go to India, and I was actually kind of exploring opportunities for volunteering and for students in the school that I was working in to be able to volunteer. And one day I had to go to visit what they called a daycare centre in the back of one of the slums in Navi Mumbai. And as I went to visit this daycare centre, I had to walk along this drain that had this incredibly green water that had this horrible stench, and I found myself just so focused on walking on either side of this drain that I wasn't actually noticing what was going on beside me, until one lady just caught my eye. And when I saw her, she had the most beautiful, huge, big smile on her face. And you know what she said to me? She said, "Welcome." And as I looked around me, all these these women who were living in, what they would call a home made of cardboard boxes and pieces of tin, were looking out at me and saying, welcome, and putting whatever, dignities they had aside to offer me some hospitality. And as I saw that smile and that huge, voice resounding of welcome in me, something just struck me. And I really couldn't believe that I was hearing and seeing this incredible joy and happiness. It did not match the surroundings. It did not match the assault to every one of my senses in that place. And that stuck with me. And I remember as I flew back into Sydney Airport and I walked through and the shining lights and the duty free and the perfume, and I thought, what world is what world? And in the weeks that ensued, and I thought about my friends, and I thought, I think those women I met on that day are happier than me. In fact, I think they're happier than all my friends. And so I began to get this inside out, upside down view of happiness. And really it stuck with me ever since. And I wanted to explore that, but I wasn't quite sure how. But it was a seed. And that seed stayed with me in every single moment for another 7 years. But that whole time I knew I had to go. I had to figure out what that was. And eventually the right time in my life came, where I could leave work, I could pack up my belongings and just go into the world with my seed of upside down happiness. And so I embarked on what was a rather unplanned, but a very intentional journey. In fact, it was a quest of sorts, because I went with a question, and that question was this: what is it that the world needs most? And what might my role be in making a difference? My role is this tiny speck on this tiny planet amongst the universe. Bit of an ambitious question, I know, but a question I couldn't help but ask. And that journey took me back to India to begin with. But what ensued from there is nothing short of extraordinary, because everywhere I went and everyone I told about my quest introduced me to somebody or some place or some program somewhere in another country that I just had to go to, and connected me to that place. That took me across 5 continents over several years. And I just want to share 2 stories out of the hundreds of extraordinary stories that I'd love to share from that journey. And one was a day in Kenya, and I had said to my hosts that I wanted to go to the places where no one goes. And they took me quite seriously. And we ended up one day going to visit a school that was being built in the village. And it was a lovely experience, but it was actually on the way back from visiting that school. We were driving along a dirt road and we were in our 4-wheel drive, and something just struck me. It was a little speck of white through the trees. And as I looked through those trees, I knew that we just had to go there. So I said to the guys driving, "What was that?" And they said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "No, let's go there." And so we did. We turned around and we drove up through those trees. And it turned out to be another school. And this school was the poorest school that I'd ever seen. The grass was this high. There were no doors or windows in the classrooms. There was pieces of tin for a toilet block. And as we arrived, the principal came running out of his room and motioned to some children to go and get us a chair to sit down on. He looked quite shocked that we'd arrived. And he sat there and proceeded to tell us about this school. And I'd visited a few other schools before, and I quite enjoyed, going to the classrooms, and the students usually sing me a song, and I knew a few words of Swahili, and we'd have this lovely exchange. So I asked him if I could visit the students in the classroom. But as I went in, I didn't get the usual reaction. In fact, most of the students began to cry. And I must have looked rather shocked myself. And the principal looked at me and he said, "It's not just the colour of your skin." He said, "It's everything about you. It's your long hair," because they all had your camera, it's your sunglasses, it's everything about you. He said, these students don't have television. They've never seen a white person. And of course, they did eventually warm up to me. And, you know, we had a lovely exchange together. But I learnt a lot on that day. Just before we left, the principal said to me, you know, this school has been here for 65 years, and you are the first visitor we've ever had. And I don't even think this was remote. This is like 20 minutes off the main highway to Mombasa, tourist route. And yet here were some of the most isolated people in the world. And not just isolated, but suffering. Because I'd learnt that they were starving. And in fact, the delivery of the food supplies, which normally came to the village via the school every Friday, had not come for several months. And so, as well as learning about, you know, who is really connected in this world where we think everyone's connected because of the internet and mobile phones, but also what happens when you actually pay attention to the spaces in between. When you do inquire about that speck of white through the trees. And that taught me a lot and has stayed with me now in the work that I do, to really pay attention to those spaces in between, because it's usually along the way to where you think you're going that stuff happens that you need to happen. Sorry, I missed it. Find the next one. So that was the school. The next story is actually years on, towards the end of this journey, after spending time living with families in Palestine and Central and South America as well, and having been hosted by people of every kind, of every religion you can imagine, as well as, you know, single mums and everything in between. And towards the end of this journey, it was in a place called Albuquerque in New Mexico that I met an 80-year-old man named Greg. Now, Greg was someone who confessed to being an ex-alcoholic, obsessive-compulsive schizophrenic. And I'm sure that somewhere inside me, I probably prejudged Greg as not having too much to offer. But in fact, he did. And over the week of this program, we got to know each other quite well, and he had this fantastic sense of humour, and we had a really good time together. But on the last day we were there, we just brushed shoulders in the corridor. And he grabbed me. He grabbed me by the shoulders, and in his very Greg way, he said, "Penny," he said, "you know what you're doing," and he's poking me in this moment. And he said, "you're going where the dots are not joined." And it was like this explosion went off inside me. And I thought, I think this is it. And interestingly, he used the Australian phrase, because in the US they say connect the dots. And when you say join the dots, they look at you kind of strangely. But he used this Australian phrase, joining the dots. And so in the days that followed, I journaled pages and pages about this metaphor of dots joining, and everything began to make sense. And I thought, well, if this is the name for whatever this is that I'm meant to be doing, then perhaps, you know, I'll find a URL that's available. And I looked it up, and there it was, joiningthedots.org for $15. I bought it, and Joining the Dots was born. But something that I learned from that journey is, as much as we can go out there and attempt to join the dots also join us. And when I came back to Australia, it wasn't really until a few years in, when I met a group of women who'd come here from Sudan, that my vision for bringing this Joining the Dots to life became more clear. It was actually at a lunch, and we were chatting, and one of these Sudanese women said to me, "Penny, you know, I've been here in Australia for 5 years, and no Australian people have invited me into their home." And then the other lady piped up and said, "Well, actually, I've been here for 10 years, and no Australian people have invited me into their home, but we'd love to go." And the very next day, as part of a leadership program I was doing, I was talking with some colleagues who, unbeknownst to them, this story the day before, who said to me, Penny, we've been looking to meet people who are new to Australia. Can you introduce us to some of these refugees and migrants who you work with? Because we've been looking for about 10 years to meet these people and make them welcome, but we don't know where to go to meet them. And the other person said, well, I'm just worried about doing something culturally wrong. So here I had one day to the next, people giving this message of wanting to reach out, wanting to connect, wanting to meet, and yet not finding a platform. And here we are in one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world. And I think, again, it was one of those fire in the belly moments where I knew this was a dot that we have to join. And of course, it didn't take too much of a brainwave to think, well, food is the way that we can connect across all cultures. And this dream that came to life. And I think I'm just going to share a couple of photos from our welcome dinners. I might just flick through. That was the one we had actually for Channel 10 with Matt Preston. And as you can see, each one of these welcome dinners is a cultural feast. In fact, I think at every dinner I try something that I've never heard of before. And people go to so much trouble to make people feel welcome. People who host, we hold these in people's homes as well as sometimes in community venues, but mainly in people's homes. People go to so much trouble to make others feel welcome. And it comes in all shapes and sizes. So this was actually a student apartment where we all sat around the coffee table, but it worked. And then, of course, the larger scale. This was the largest one we had actually in Marrickville Town Hall with 300 people last year. Can you imagine everyone walking in with a dish? It's kind of chaotic. But we had facilitators at every table. Thank you. We can just go back to the dream has come to life because of several things. One is pure hard work and dedication, not just from myself, but actually from hundreds of extraordinary people all over Australia who have come to dedicate themselves to bringing this to life. But the other one is something we discovered, that when you find something that's already in the hearts and minds of people, something that's widely and deeply felt in the community, it will work. It will take off. And I think that's what happened. And I've been thinking about this whole leadership thing. And I believe that there's different types of leaders. The world needs all types. From what I understand, my style is that of a catalyst, catching sparks and setting things in motion, inspiring other people to create change. But what I really want to share is that I think of most value is sparking something called listening. And I don't just mean with your ears. The First Nations people of this country can teach us a lot about listening with our whole being, with all our senses, if we have the will to really tune in. And it's this type of listening that I think is crucial in the world right now. I'm convinced that all the connections, all the ideas and solutions that we need already exist. But the dots only join when we dedicate ourselves to tuning in. And that's what we did. For 1 year, we held what we called a listening campaign, where we just tuned in to what people were saying. And really, when I met those Sudanese women, it was like the culmination of that year of listening. That made sense. It wasn't just what we heard from those women, but so many others. The vision of joining the dots is to reconnect to that which we've fallen asleep to. The interconnections that are everywhere, inside us and all around us. And the beautiful thing is that we don't have to travel to the most remote parts of another continent to do this. We can connect in the most deep and life-changing way right here at our dinner tables. Just last night we were at our launch of our project in Liverpool in the far west of Sydney. We finally got out there, we were so excited. And I've been thinking all day about what one lady said at the table that I was at. I see at the end of the dinners we share what we call a speech bubble. You've all got one there tonight. And we ask people to write one word about how they feel. Not to think too much about it and to write it in any language you want, but just to write what word comes up from your heart at the end of the night. And this one lady at my table said her word was accepted. And she said, this is the first time since I came to Australia I feel accepted. So I thought I'd give you a chance to experience that as well. So if you've got your pen there and your speech bubble, to actually just write down, without thinking about it, what word's coming up for you right now, after hearing the stories, perhaps after talking to the person next to you about your passion. Whatever it is, what word is coming up for you right now? And once again now, just share your word with the people around you. Tell them how you feel. Does anyone want to call out their word? Let's have a few brave people.
Hope. Inspired. Love.
Hungry? Thank you. The Welcome Dinner Project brings out the best in people. It's why it's such a privilege to be part of it. After all, it's only when we discover or rediscover our common humanity that we will find the will and the way to walk together. And in urgent times like these, walk together we must. Thank you.